our discussion. In the last week, we have discussed and get an introductory outline of structuralism and how structuralism changed the whole perception of looking towards literature, changed the whole perception of understanding of language and literature. And there we have discussed Roland Barthes' very famous book, S oblique Z, and how Roland Barthes in that book discussed about five different codes. And then further, we discussed about the last two codes, connotative code and symbolic code, and how this connotative code and symbolic code applied to Edgar Allan Poe's very interesting story. And we discussed about Edgar Allan Poe's story for can say, in a way that we want to find out how this structuralism applied to literary work. And even we talked about five basic, you can say, perceptions where structuralist presents five series of parallels, echo, reflections, contrast patterns, and we use those to understand the whole story that goes on in that particular format. We have discussed all those things in structuralism. Now today we are going to discuss about post-structuralism, and we are trying to find out some theoretical difference between structuralism and post-structuralism also. Let me once again tell you the fact that what we are talking or what we are discussing in this specific paper called research methodology, all those ideas which are or which can be used in pursuing research. So it is simply I'm giving a beginning or introductory outline of all these theories. I'm not talking in detail about all those theories because every theory requires at least 12 to 15 lectures to understand. But as this is not a specific paper for theories, you have a special paper for theories in second year where you can understand all these different theories, including liberal humanist theory to critical theories. You can understand each and everything in the next year's paper. So here I am giving you simply the outline of all these theories that which are usually and can be used in fulfilling the dissertation of 100 marks at the end of the fourth semester. But it is simply outline. Don't think that I'm going or I'm talking in detailed about each and every theory. That's why I've given an outline of structuralism. Those who are interested in understanding structuralism can study separately. And even we can talk about post-structuralism. Even in this case also, I'll say the same thing that if you want to understand it, I'll give you a brief outline. I will make you to understand how the thing is and how this post-structuralism works and how this post-structuralism is. I'll tell you each and everything, but I'm not talking about different theorists who develop theories in either structuralism or post-structuralism. I'm giving you an outline which will help you to follow your research. Now let us begin our discussion today. Now the first and foremost thing and very primary question that comes in our mind And the primary question is post-structuralism a continuation and development of structuralism, or is it a form of rebellion against structuralism? What exactly it is? Now, in one important sense, you can say it is the latter one. It is, in a sense, a very effective way of rebelling is to accuse your predecessors that they have not encouraged or they have not having courage of their convictions. That is one of the ways that you can rebel against your predecessors. Similarly, you can find out, my friends, the post structuralists accuse structuralists of not following through the implications of the views about language. If you understand, if you remember certain things, my friend, what we discussed in structuralism is that Ferdinand de Saussure mentioned that every word is not a thing, it is a sign, and every sign has signifier and signified. And for that, he has given a very beautiful example, and we have discussed that example that if you are looking at a traffic light, there is a sign, and the red means red is signifier, which is the word. And what is the meaning of the red? To stop, that is signified. Now, structuralism has talked about language basically, but post structuralists always accuse structuralists that they have not followed the implications of the views about language on which the whole their intellectual exercise or intellectual system is based upon. Structuralists have not carefully followed the implications. As we saw, it is one of the structuralism's characteristics view is that language doesn't just reflect or record the world, rather it shapes it. So that how we see is what we see. It is our own perception of looking at things with the use of language. The post structuralist maintains that the consequences of this belief that language is simply a reflection of what we see. Language doesn't have any its own sense, and that's why it is arbitrary. Because what meaning we derive meaning of our own. Language doesn't make you to derive its own meaning. So word is not having its own meaning within itself. You find your own meaning of that particular word. That's why post-structuralists, they are pointing out very categorically that because of this understanding, that language doesn't reflect or record the world, it shapes it so that how we see is what we see. But this understanding leads to uncertainty. Why uncertainty? Because if you are saying that language is arbitrary, language is not giving any sort of sense as such, it depends on the user, how he uses it, then language is uncertain. And since we can have no access to any fixed landmark, which is beyond linguistic processing, that if you talk about language, you're only talking about linguistic processing. And hence we have no certain standards by which we can measure anything. Structuralists talk about that language is not certain in itself. Now, have they given any landmark for that? Have they pointed out that, okay, this is the parameters for measuring that language is conveying it properly or not? They have not given any landmark. They have not given any parameters to it. Now, if you don't have any fixed point of reference, if you want to measure certain things, you require to have a fixed point of reference always. And if you don't have any fixed point of reference against which you have to measure that particular thing, you cannot tell whether you are doing it correctly or not, whether you are moving it or not. Because if you want to check the movement, if you want to check the process, you need to have one particular landmark that from this point it begins. Okay, whether it is moving, yes. So how you are going to measure this movement? You are going to measure this movement from the point it begins. That means it is a landmark. Now, if language is not having any of its capacity to test it, you don't have any fixed point to decide, then how are you going to understand the complete process? It is simple. If you take a very easy example for that, if you have traveled in a train, you can understand it very comfortably. If you sit in a train which is halting at a railway station or a railway platform, and another train is on the other track beside you, you are sitting in a window, and all of a sudden you feel that your train is moving. But actually your train is not moving. The other train is on the other track. That train is moving further. That makes you to feel that you are moving. And once the train of the other track passed off, then you realize, oh, your train is not moving. You are at the same place. The other train was moving. So it is a fixed point. Platform is a fixed point from where you have understood the movement. Now, post-structuralism says, in effect, that fixed intellectual reference points are permanently removed. The fixed reference points are permanently removed. That is removed. That is what post-structuralists used to say. Removed by properly taking on board what structuralists said about language. Language doesn't carry anything with itself. You carry. Your perception carry all the things. And that's why post-structuralists accuse or post-structuralists say that the fixed intellectual reference points which are there in a language, those are removed by the structuralists. And they change the whole analogy, in space. And they put it in such a way that something you put it in a space where there is no gravity, you will not find anything. There is no ups and downs, there is no sense of movement because there is no gravity. And since there is no gravity, you are not able to understand how it is going to be worked. Post-structuralists accuse that in the same fashion, structuralists put language and they send us into a gravity-free universe. The language is put into gravity-free universe where it is moving anywhere, wherever it wants. And how it is going to survive, how it is going to solve the problem. Now, the situation of being without any intellectual points is one way of describing what the post-structuralists call the decentered universe. Whatever you want to measure, you want certain center for that. And if the center is not fixed, how you are going to locate the things around that circle? If language is not giving any meaning, then what exactly it is that gives you meaning? If the red color or the red RED symbolizes stop, what it that is a fixed point which makes it to decide. Someone had decided at certain level there might be a fixed point. How that there is no fixed point for that? If there is green light, you think in the signal that you have to proceed. Somebody has defined somewhere at some point there is a fixed point. It is not that vaguely anybody has planned that okay, this is going to be happen with this. No, it is not to be defined by someone. And that's what post-structuralist says, that structuralism has put us into a decentered universe. Anything in this world has a beginning. And if you are saying that, okay, the language is having its own, it doesn't carry meaning, you define the meaning, then somebody has started it. You cannot claim that it is because simply language is not having this. No. Somebody has allocated certain things. Somebody has allocated red to stop. Okay. In that system. If at that time, if somebody allocated that black is stop, then today the black will be the same thing. So post-structuralists accused structuralists that they put it in a decentered universe in which, by definition, if one wants to see it, we cannot know where we are, since all the concepts which previously defined the center, and hence also the margin, have been deconstructed or undermined in the manner which is described. We will talk about it later on. Somebody that we are not familiar with, that who defined it, who decided it. That's what I am saying again and again. Who defined this concept, the center or keeping something in the margin? This has to be deconstructed, and that is why post-structuralism and deconstruction, both the phenomena are closely associated with each other. You cannot say that I'll study post-structuralism differently and deconstruction differently. No, that's why after post-structuralism, I'm immediately starting with deconstruction, because it is part of further process of post-structuralism. The characteristics, concerns of post-structuralism, as hinted here, as I say, it is talking against, it is giving against the norms of structuralism, may at first seem pretty remote thing for us. Now you may have, or you might ask, that why this constant anxiety about language when it seems to us that it is perfectly working well in day-to-day life or for day-to-day purpose. It's perfectly doing well. Whatever language you speak, it is doing well. It is beautiful. It is correct. But a reflection, we may find that it is precisely on this matter of anxiety about language that we can most easily identify with post-structuralist concern. There are certain post-structuralist concerns. For these anxious feelings, seem remarkably pervasive whenever we have to use language at any level beyond that of casual daily exchange with people we know very well and whose status is the same as our own. It is not the anxiety with those users of language. It is beyond the daily exchange, the language which you use beyond daily exchange. If you understand, my friend, language is not simply working in one capacity. Language is working in various different capacities. You cannot say that I'm using a language. Okay, if I give one simple example to you for understanding, I use varieties of language in a day. When I'm talking with my parents, my language is different. When I'm talking with my friends, my language is different. When I'm talking with my younger family members, my language is different. When I'm talking with my teachers, my language is different. When I'm talking with a vendor, my language is different. When I'm authorities, my language is different. So we use language, not the one only, but we talk language with various different purposes and varieties. Think that how we change the use of language every time. And that is what post structure is about. You cannot restrict language with one understanding. Language has got a different relational aspect is one of the most important. You can see that how language is working, how language is shifting itself. Again, for instance, you can take any example. In a very different situations, your language and your tone changes because have you deal. Suppose I'm a speaker of Marathi language. The Marathi which I use with an authority and the Marathi which I use with my parent is something different. Then I'm not using the same variety of language, the same language. Because according to the status, the language is also changing. This is very beautifully the example which is not although related with your topic, but somehow it makes me to give you that example. If you look at Sanskrit drama, unfortunately we don't know about Sanskrit drama. But the Sanskrit drama is not written only in Sanskrit language. That's why I said in ancient India, language is stratified. Language is not the same. In Sanskrit drama, there were 6 or 7 languages used in only one drama. Sanskrit is one of the languages. There are various arguments. I'll talk when time comes for that argument with you, but not now. If Brahman is talking, he will use Sanskrit. Kshatriya will talk. And there are various strategies in Sanskrit. Kalidasa's Abhigyan Chakunta in 6 or 7 languages. That's why the period was. That's why we are multilingual. Indians are multilingual if you compare with the Europeans. Europeans. That's if you see the social is what is going on. That is European notion. We are multilingual always. Every Indian will speak at least 3 languages or understand 3 languages. In Sanskrit, Prakrit, Gadi, Ardhamagadi, Marathi, Ardhamarathi. These are the 7 languages used in one drama. But unfortunately, we have denominated. It's another issue to discuss. That means every language having its own stratification. And if you take, for instance, I'll stuck up to post-structuralism that will make you to understand. Any slightly less straightforward language situation, like writing something to your bank. You're writing something to your bank. You will use different kind of language. And if you're striking up a friendship with a party or sending a letter of condolences, in these different cases, if you see very carefully, my friends, there's an almost universally felt anxiety that the things we hadn't intended, or some convey a wrong impression, or betray our ignorance, or anxious about language. We are very serious anxiety about language. Whenever we use a phrase like, if you see what I, or you can say, in manner of speaking, there is with these phrases commonly appearing, you will find out in these kinds of phrases underlying sense we are not really in control of the linguistic system. Because I have written something, but what I have written is not in my hand to express it. I'm trying to express it in so powerful way in my language. But sometimes I'm afraid that language will not communicate what I want to say. And this creates a sort of little bit of anxiety with all of us. Now, these feelings, whenever you write, they are really the same when you try to speak. Or surely it will have the same source. That's why when you try to write down, the same sort of anxiety is with you about a language, and when you try to speak, the same sort of anxiety is coming into your mind with the help of this language. So if you find it that, friends, am I getting clear to you? Because I'm getting one complaint that it's not proper, because today is, am I clear, audible to you? Please respond. Yeah, network connection is disturbed because of the heavy. In my area, there is a heavy. You can see that my uh, window is open and the air is so heavy that. Okay. If it is recorded, I'll post it on YouTube, then so that it will be comfortable for you to get it. But right now it's okay. Right now it is okay. Okay. So if you see it that the way it is working, excuse me, I'll shut. And if you see it very carefully, my friends, that the anxiety about a language is simply because we are sure about it, that whether this is going to make it proper or convey properly that what we want to say or what we want to point out, whether it is properly giving that idea or not, we are not able to understand. And that's why there is anxiety about the use of language, whether it is written or spoken. However, it will be easy if I try to make a small list of difference between structuralism and post-structuralism. Because if you understand this difference between structuralism and post-structuralism, it will be easy for us to know that how it is going on. Now let us take the first thing of structuralism and post-structuralism, its origin. If you look at it, origin of structuralism. Now structuralism, please understand this very important difference or distinctions between structuralism and post-structuralism. Structuralism derives ultimately from linguistics. That is what we have discussed in the last week's lectures. Linguistics is a discipline which has always been inherently confident about possibility of establishing objective knowledge. Linguistics is trying to establish objective knowledge. It believes that if we observe accurately, collect data systematically, and make logical deductions, then we can reach to a reliable conclusion. Reliable conclusions about language and the world. This is what structuralism looks at. Structuralism inherits this confidently scientific outlook, as we have seen it in quantitative methods where we collect the data. Structuralism believes in methods, system, and reason as being able to establish reliable truths. Whereas, if you see, post-structuralism derives ultimately, friends, from philosophy. Structuralism derives from linguistics. Post-structuralism derives from philosophy. And if you see, philosophy is a discipline which has always tended to emphasize the difficulty of achieving secure knowledge about things. Philosophy always emphasized this difficulty. If you see Nietzsche's very famous remark, there is no facts, only interpretations. Philosophy is, so to speak, skeptical by nature, and usually undercuts and questions commonsensical notions and assumptions. It questions continuously. Commonsensical notions. What is its procedure? Its procedure often begins by calling into what you call question. It questions. What is questions? Or question what is usually taken for granted as simply the way things are. Questions are simply taken for granted as the things are. The post-structuralism inherits this same habit of philosophy. Post-structuralism inherits these habits of skepticism and intensifies this skepticism. It, it regards any confidence in the scientific method as naive. Because if you see structuralism, it is having a scientific method. Post-structuralism regards that scientific method is naive and even derives a certain masochistic intellectual pleasure from knowing for certain things that we can't know anything for certain. It's carrying this notion in its mind that we can't know anything. And it is fully conscious of irony and paradox. And that's why you will find out there is a difference between, or distinction between structuralism and post-structuralism. Even you will find out, my friends, if you see the tone and style of both, structuralist writing tend towards abstraction and generalization. Because it aims for a detached scientific coolness of tone. Structuralism is detached. Scientific coolness of tone. It has given its derivation from linguistic science. A beautiful example is of Roland Barthes' 1966 essay, Introduction to Structural Analysis of Narrative. If you see that essay, it is of scientific tone. It is detaching. It is tending towards abstraction and generalization, making the things general. In that essay, what Roland Barthes tried to follow the tone and treatment with an orderly exposition and is completing the whole thing with the diagrams. And that's why we'll find out in structuralism the style is neutral and anonymous and is a typical scientific style of writing. But post-structuralists writing, by contrast, you can say, my friends, that it tends to be much more emotive. Structuralist writing is scientific. Post-structuralist writing is emotive. The tone of the language is urgent or euphoric, you can say. And the style is flamboyant and self-conscious style, you will find out, followed in post-structuralist writing. Titles given in the post-structuralist writing may contain puns and allusions, and most of the time the central line of the argument is based on pun or any kind of word play, you will find out, my friends. That's why most of the time deconstructive writing fixes some material aspects of language. Material aspects such as a metaphor used by writer or etymology of the word. Overall, you will find out post-structuralist writing seems to aim for an engaged warmth rather than detached coolness. Because detached coolness is part of structuralist writing. Post-structuralist writing is engaged warmth, is having an engaged warmth, it is engaging you continuously. Now, if you look at the attitude to language, structuralists accept that the world is constructed through language, in the sense that we do not have access to reality other than through the linguistic medium. All the same, it decides to live with the fact and continue to use language to think and perceive. For structuralists, after all, language is an orderly system. Language is orderly system, not chaotic one. So, realizing our dependence upon it, it need to induce the intellectual despair. This is how structuralism works on. By contrast, post-structuralism is much more, I can say, fundamentalist in insisting upon the consequences of the view that reality itself is textual. It wants to show again and again that reality is textual. Post-structuralism develops what threaten to become terminal anxieties about the possibility of achieving language or achieving any knowledge through language. Because that is what structuralism used to think, that if you want to acquire, if you want to get knowledge, you have to go through language. Otherwise, it is impossible for you to get the knowledge. But post-structuralism is pointing out that there is anxiety about the possibility of achieving any knowledge through language. There's an anxiety. Because most of the time, as I said you earlier also, in my earlier lectures also, I discussed with you that most of the communication used to take place in a non-verbal format. Because you're using verbal format, you require language. And that's why I've given you an example that communication skill used to say that 80% is non-verbal communication and 20% is verbal communication. Now, if you want to achieve any knowledge, if structuralism is saying that if you want to achieve knowledge, you have to pass through, you have to go through language and its linguistic science, linguistic understanding. But post-structuralism used to say that no, it is having develops a threaten. There is a terminal anxiety about getting knowledge through language. The verbal science, what you do about it? The verbal science is constantly floating free of the concept to which it is designated. There are signs, verbal signs. Verbal signs, where you will find out the way you talk. There are certain signs which doesn't carry any proper meaning to it, but still it conveys what you want to say. If I'm using certain gestures or certain postures, meaning of those gestures and postures are designated to the situation, designated to the concept. So there is no use of specific language for it. There's a post-structuralists, the way the post-structuralists speak about language, that language involves rather obsessive imagery-based liquids, imageries. You are beautiful if you use this word. And if you want to convey the beauty in a more, you can say, stressed way, you say you look as beautiful as rose. Now, if you use this particular metaphor here in this sentence, it is the verbal sign of rose that is constantly floating. Now, the rose here is used for beauty, but this rose can be used by botanists in a different way. Language carries imagery which are based on liquids. It can move anywhere, wherever it wants. Wherever it suits, it will move. You cannot restrict it. Meanings are always fluid. Meanings are not the same. If you think or if you see very carefully, my friends, if I'm saying, I'm using a word called bank. Now, the meaning of the bank can have, depends on the context, depends on the situation that you are using it. Bank is a financial institution also, and bank is besides the river. There is multiplicity of meaning. And meanings are fluid and subject to the constant slippage. It's always slipping into other context. Now this linguistic liquid, which is sloping over unpredictable, or it defines or attempts to carry certain signification, or it is transferring from giver to receiver. When it is moving from giver to receiver, it is passing through various phases. That's why it may change its meaning, and that's why you have an anxiety for language. When we use words, when we try to write down, that's why we are very much anxious about writing. It may not convey the same sort of meaning that what you intended when you are writing all those things, because it is meaning is fluid. We are not fully in control of the medium of language. We are not controlling all the mediums of language. So meaning cannot be planted in the set places. Because if you have seen in the farms, when the farmer is sowing seeds, he'll not put it one by one by one. He'll throw it with his arm open. That much of the land it throws, it will drift with the winds and it will be spread all over the land, and you will get the crops coming from every place in that particular land. Similarly, the meaning is fluid in the same fashion. That's why there is a big anxiety about the use of language. That is what post-structuralists time and again trying to point it out. That's why the meaning of the words cannot be guaranteed 100%, 100%. You don't have the 100% meaning that what you want to say about that particular word. And so that what we use a method of contamination, using opposites to convey you. Because if you want to define night, you need to tell about day. Or if you want to talk about good, you have to take a reference of evil. Then it is possible for you to talk about good. Or else they are interfered with by their own history. Because if you're using the opposite word, the word is also coming with its own history. So it is interfering it into getting meaning of the earlier word. So the absolute sense, this absolute sense retain troublesome and ghostly presence within the present day usage of language. And it is likely to materialize just when we thought it was safe to use them. That's why language is always creating a sort of anxiety with us. What it deals with, what it talks about, we'll continue it in tomorrow's lecture. I hope that I'm communicating it in a proper sense. I know it is a little bit difficult to understand because I'm giving a brief ideas about all those things. And we'll talk about the distinction, the fourth distinction and the remaining third distinction tomorrow's lecture. And we'll try to again make a simple understanding of post-structuralism in tomorrow's lecture also.